Okay, remember between verses 22 and 23, there is a gap. And there is debate as to how long this gap lasts. Two passages of scripture that give us some insight are Galatians 1 and 2 Corinthians 11. And I think this is the last slide I had up before. And I'm going to talk more about this. I'm just kind of giving you the bird's eye view of Galatians 1, where Paul shares some things that Luke doesn't about his life, his early life. So looking at it from a map, Paul was in Jerusalem, and he received letters from the high priest to go to Damascus. And we talked about Damascus and why that may have been a place of choice for Paul to visit, to persecute people. He's saved on the way. Then what does he do? Well, what he does not do is go back to Jerusalem. In fact, he makes that clear in Galatians 1. I did not go up to Jerusalem. He went to, now I put Petra on here, and let me explain why. He says, I went into Arabia, okay? When you look at these other passages, especially one we're going to look at in a moment, you get the impression that Paul had direct access with the king of this region, and the region of which Petra is the capital city is actually the region of Nabatea. Nabatea is a sub-region within the larger region of Arabia. So popularly, that whole area was known as Arabia. But technically, Nabatea was tucked in right close to the bottom edge of the Dead Sea. I'll show you a better map of that in just a moment. And then from Arabia / Nabatea, and probably including Petra, he goes back to Damascus. And then, according to Galatians 1, after 3 years of all of this, he eventually heads up to Jerusalem. Okay, so it's Jerusalem, Damascus, Arabia, whatever that involves, back to Damascus, and then up to Jerusalem. Okay? So here's a map kind of showing the division of these regions. You see Arabia is a large region here, and Nabatea is tucked into it. And again, popularly speaking, that was all Arabia. Okay? And Paul may have actually gone into Arabia. Some people believe that he actually visited the area of Mount Sinai where Paul had received the law. We have no proof of that, but there's no reason why that couldn't have happened during the time that he was in that region. Okay? So Petra, anybody here been to Petra? I don't remember who's been to Israel, and some people who go to Israel go to Jordan as well. That's where Petra is today, in the country of Jordan. You can see it's kind of south of the Dead Sea a bit. Fantastic city. I've never been there myself. I'd love to visit it. These are stock photos, so I have no idea who this soldier is standing here, but I just want you to see the landscape. A lot of amazing carvings out of the rock. Is it sandstone? I don't remember. It's one of the softer kinds of rock. Some of these were temples. Some of these were mausoleums where dead people were buried. It just all kinds of interesting carvings in the rock. And there are other places like this in the world, but Petra is rather unique. I love this picture taken at nighttime. So this is the area that served as the capital of Nabatea there in the area of larger Arabia. Okay, so when we get to verse 23, Luke says, after many days, and I think I've told you this before, we have to be patient with Luke. When we get to heaven, I'm going to sit down with him and say, Luke, I probably won't care then, but Luke, could you just, you probably knew how much time that was that passed by. Why didn't you just tell us? It would have helped us create the chronology of Paul in the early church. And he's going to look at me and say, the Holy Spirit led me to do this. What am I going to say? And I'm going to rest my case. So anyway, after many days, the Jews plotted to kill him. I'm going to come back to this gap here. I'm not done with that. The Jews plotted to kill Paul. Okay, why do they want to kill him? Well, what's probably the default reason why they want to kill Paul? Pardon? Yeah, he converted. So, yeah, he was a turncoat, if you will, a traitor. Yep. So they want to get him. Okay, but their plot became known to Saul, and how, we don't know. The Jews watched the gates day and night to kill him. So I don't know if they were expecting him to come in or if they were expecting him to leave. That's a little fuzzy, but they were keeping an eye open for him. CD. Yep. Well, only one of them. There's one coming. Yep. I've only mentioned Galatians 1. The other one is 2 Corinthians 11, but I haven't cited the passage yet. And that's because it's tied to what Luke says here. Okay? So Galatians 1, and then 2 Corinthians is coming up. So then what happens? So the disciples took him by night. They laid him down through a wall in a large basket. And of course, from there, he goes up to Jerusalem. Okay? So what's happening here in verses 24 and 25 is after that gap that we understand it being 3 years. And by the way, the only passage that we have to suggest that it was 3 years is Galatians 1. Because Paul says, after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem. Okay? So, 2 Corinthians chapter 11, here it is, CD, verses 32 and 33. Paul, talks in that chapter about all of his sufferings and persecutions, and he's not trying to show off. He's trying to legitimize his apostleship by saying, basically, if I were a false apostle, then why would I suffer all of this? It wouldn't make any sense. It wouldn't be worth it. False apostles don't do that sort of thing. They want all the glory, but none of the guts. And so he gives them all of this list of persecutions that he faced. And then near the end of the chapter, he says, in Damascus, the governor, now we don't know the governor's name, but the actual word there is ethnarch. He was an ethnic governor set up by Aretas the king. They say, hold on, what's going on here? Who's ruling the world right now? Rome. Okay, so what's this talk of King Aretas? Well, remember, there was King Herod in Judea. There were other kings set up under Roman authority. The Romans had a lot of territory to rule, and so they would delegate certain places, and especially if they were hotbeds of potential rebellion, they would delegate them to people who were considered to be, strong leaders. Aretas the king was one of those. Now, Aretas, I think I give you his fuller name here. Yeah, he was Aretas IV Philopatris, and he reigned over the Nabateans from 9 BC to AD 40. Okay, so he had a pretty long reign. And the Nabateans have a history that goes back quite a ways, and it ended in the 2nd century, actually probably even within the confines of the 2nd century, let's say, it ended. But the sources that I have consulted say that Aretas was the most powerful and capable of all the kings that ruled the Nabateans during their history of a couple hundred years or so. And so he's an interesting character, and he's mentioned by name only here in the New Testament. And why does Paul mention him by name? Well, he was the ruler of the Nabateans, and for some reason, not stated here, Aretas wanted Paul to be brought back to him, bound. Okay? And so what do you do with this passage? Because in Acts, Luke says the Jews wanted to kill him, but in 2 Corinthians, Paul says Aretas the king was after me. And probably the best way to answer that is to say he was enemies of both of them. And when this became known, Aretas the king got in touch with the ethnarch. Now, the Romans had placed Aretas over Syria at that time. Okay, so Aretas is the king of the Nabateans in Greater Arabia, but the Romans have given him oversight of Syria up to the north as well. And so he has an ethnarch up there because he can't be up there physically. And so whoever this ethnarch is, Aretas sends a message to him saying, I want Paul brought back here. And we could speculate as to why. Maybe Paul offended, maybe Paul was evangelizing. People were getting saved and it was messing up the religious system or the peace. We just don't know. But let me give you one possible other reason why Aretas might not have liked Paul and the Jews. And this takes us all the way back to a man named John the Baptist. Remember him? Hey. Why did John the Baptist lose his head? Yeah, yeah. A mother asked for his head, but why? What had he done that? Yeah. Yeah, he did. What specifically was pointed out that he had done wrong? Yeah, okay. He divorced his own wife so that he could take his brother's wife, his brother Philip's wife, and Philip, by the way, was up in Syria, in that area, kind of ruling over that area earlier. And so, and that made Herod mad, but he respected John, so he didn't want to do anything to hurt him. But when his new wife, Herodias, found out, it was off with his head. So what does that have to do with this story? Well, the important part of this story is the identity of the wife that Herod Antipas dumped in order to take his brother Philip's wife. Who did he divorce for his brother's wife? It just so happened that years before this event, Herod Antipas had made a pact with a man named Aretas IV, a military pact. And to seal that pact, Aretas IV had given Herod Antipas, his daughter in marriage. Now the plot thickens. So when Herod Antipas dumps his first wife, he's dumping the daughter of King Aretas. That was not a good idea. So what did Aretas the king decide to do? He decided to take vengeance on his new enemy. Pacts came and went with these. And divorcing his wife was tantamount to breaking the covenant. And so he actually mounted a military offensive against Herod Antipas and gave him a military spanking, a serious military spanking. In fact, he would have gone farther and probably, penetrated the Jewish land even more had the Romans not found out about it and ordered him to stop. Remember, he was working under their auspices. And so they said, Aretas, enough is enough, go home. And he went home probably satisfied that he had humiliated Antipas in so doing. Now that is all extra biblical stuff, but it's fairly well attested. And so Aretas may have hated Paul in part because he was Jewish and he hated the Jewish people. What happened with Herod Antipas left a bad taste in his mouth. So for whatever reason, Aretas seems to be in cahoots with the Jews in Damascus under the leadership of the ethnarch to get a hold of Paul and deliver him back into the hands of King Aretas. Now, did I totally confuse you with all those little nuts and bolts? Questions about that? It just trying to help you tie together. This is all stuff that Luke leaves out, well, except for what is said, right here. But it's very interesting and plays into the story. All right, move on. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Where did you find all that?
I couldn't sleep one night, so I just made it up. This is going to be good. And my students will believe it. No. Commentaries. I don't know if I haven't checked Josephus on it, but worthy Bible commentaries and articles, or if you go to EBSCOhost, there are some articles that deal with King Aretas. Just the other day, I looked up some more stuff. I was on Encyclopedia Britannica reading more about him and some other, reliable sources. And most of them agree as to the length of his reign and his prominence as king. So, you just kind of snoop around, but, stay away from Wikipedia and stuff like that. You make sure you're getting into, peer-reviewed sources. It's not inspired, okay, but it's stuff that's generally understood to be historical truth. All right, so, okay, Damascus, just as a sidelight, is actually one of the 10 cities of the Decapolis. Decapolis means 10 cities. They were Greek cities that actually, they were kind of under the oversight of the Roman Empire, but they remained autonomous. And now when it comes to history, I'm having a hard time finding out historically why they remained autonomous. There seems to be a little bit of fuzz in the minds of historians as to why the Decapolis cities didn't come under the same dominance as other cities did. And so there are some opinions out there, but that part of history is a little foggy. But I just want to show you that Damascus was one of those 10 Decapolis cities. Okay, so now Paul comes to Jerusalem. Now, if you look at Galatians 1 again, you'll see that when he comes to Jerusalem, he only meets actually one apostle, and that's Peter. He says, I didn't see any of the other apostles except Peter and James. And remember, he refers to James, the brother of the Lord, as an apostle, not one of the 12, but in a leadership position that reflects apostolic type authority. So that's one of those broader uses of the word apostle in the New Testament. And he tried to join the disciples. They're afraid of him. They didn't believe he was a disciple. This guy, yeah, we know what he's up to. He's a wolf in sheep's clothing. So who comes along and convinces the leadership in Jerusalem that Saul is for real? Guy we haven't seen for a little while. Barnabas. Here he is again. Ta-da! Barnabas. Last time we saw Barnabas was back in chapter 4 when he was graciously and generously giving to help those who were in need. Barnabas takes him and he brings him to the apostles. Now again, apostles plural, according to Galatians 1, only Peter and James, the brother of the Lord of the leadership, are actually there. But, they represent the leadership in Jerusalem. And he declared to them how he had seen the Lord on the road and that he'd spoken to him and how he'd preached boldly at Damascus in the name of Jesus. Okay, and here's the account in Galatians 1. After 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to get acquainted with Cephas and stayed with him 15 days, 2 weeks. I saw none of the other apostles, only James, the Lord's brother. Okay, so, and Paul is a little bit more specific about time than Luke is. Luke likes the many days and some time, and Paul's being a little more specific here for us. Now, this little phrase, he was coming in and going out, simply means the persecution was over. When Paul got converted, that pretty much brought an end to that particular phase of persecution. So coming in and going out just typifies the idea of freedom, access, no fear of persecution at this stage. All right? He spoke boldly. Now, notice, see if you see Stephen's image coming through the text here. He spoke boldly in the name of the Lord Jesus and disputed against the Hellenists, but they attempted to kill him. It's almost like deja vu, right? Same thing that Stephen did, Paul is doing now. And I think Luke is intentionally trying to show us here that because of the impact that Stephen had on Paul's life, Paul is actually willing to imitate Stephen's ministry and even give his life if need be, as Stephen had given his life. But in God's providence, that's not going to happen, okay? So when the brethren found out, they brought him down to Caesarea and sent him out to Tarsus. Now, again, Caesarea looks like it's up from Jerusalem, but topographically and in terms of its importance, everything's down from Jerusalem. So they bring him to Caesarea, and it says they sent him to Tarsus. So I'm guessing that he probably got on a boat and sailed to Tarsus. Don't know for sure, but that's probably the more likely conclusion. And of course, Tarsus is home. It's where he's from, right? And now I mentioned at the very end of the last class that from this point until the time that we see Paul again, something in the neighborhood of 7 to 10 years is going to pass. That's incredible. Remember that Luke does skip over time. I mean, he just skipped over a 3-year period in Paul's early life. Let's be conservative and say that 7 years passed, because there is a difference of opinions just how long he was away in Tarsus. But if you take 7 years now in Tarsus plus the 3 years when he was first saved, that's a decade of Paul's life that passes before we see him again. So I think it's safe to say that by the time Barnabas goes and finds Saul and brings him back to Antioch in chapter 11, that we'll see later, and he becomes an integral part of the ministry, you have an entire decade of Paul's life already under the bridge. So Paul has had a lot of time to mature and so on. What's he do when he's in Tarsus? Well, we'll get a hint of that when we get to the Jerusalem Council. All right, I'll just put that bug in your ear and you can kind of, when we get to Jerusalem Council, we'll come back to that. So let's add another POC here. That's Caesarea right up there, right about in the middle of your Israel map there. Caesarea, amazing city. Built by Herod, who else? The Great, Herod the Great. That'd be Agrippa's papa. And it was built in honor of Caesar. I mean, everything that Herod did, he did to honor somebody in order to win points with them, including the building of the temple, reforming of the temple. So now on your big map, let's add Tarsus, okay? That's Tarsus up there about 3 o'clock. Right in the middle on the right side there is well, no, it's there. Nah, it's not. Where's my mouse? Here, mousey. Right there. Now, just to give you a heads up, Antioch that we'll mark later is right over here, okay? Right around the corner will be Antioch on the Orontes River. Here's Tarsus. Tarsus was the capital of what province in Rome? And this, I really kind of would like you to know the name of the province, because that will come into play later on at the Jerusalem Council. Cilicia. Okay, it's the capital of Cilicia, and this is just a little extra. It was also known for its production of goat hair that was used for tent making. So Tarsus, the whole region of Cilicia, was well known as a producer of materials used in tent making, which kind of helps to also make sense as to why Paul was a tent maker. Okay, anyway, that's neither here nor there. When the brethren found out, okay, they sent him to Tarsus. Then, and here's one of those progress reports that we talk about. Then the churches throughout all Judea and Galilee and Samaria had peace and were edified, and walking in the fear of the Lord and the comfort of the Spirit, they were multiplied. Now, you often hear people say that the church is the weakest when it's at peace. It's persecution that strengthens the church. Well, there's a lot of truth in that, but that's not always the case. Here's a case where a time of respite, a time of reprieve from persecution actually gives the church a chance to kind of get together and to grow, to be encouraged, to be edified. So there is spiritual growth going on here as a result of the cessation of persecution. Okay. All right. Now, why, after all this, why are we going back to Peter? You know, we know that the gospel is supposed to go to the Gentiles, right? Paul, the main missionary to the Gentiles who spearheads that mission, is now in the middle of the picture. He's saved. He's poised for this ministry. So why all of a sudden do we leave Paul and head back to Peter? Well, think ahead a little bit. Why would going back to Peter at this juncture be important in the narrative? I just saw your hand move there. I thought it's good enough. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the main minister to the Gentiles is in place. That part of the narrative is good to go. But we still haven't resolved the issue of the addition of the Gentiles as a people in the church, to the church. And Peter's the man that God chose to use in order to bring that to pass. Now, we may be stepping back in time a little bit. There's some debate as exactly when this particular event took place, but I think that it's probably safest to say it would be in the same general period of time, okay? We'll just assume that for now. So he's going through all the parts of the country. Now, don't think this is just Peter. Probably all of the 12 are doing something like this because their sphere of ministry, remember, is pretty much Israel. And Galatians 2 is that passage where they give Paul the right hand of fellowship and they acknowledge your mission is to the Gentiles, ours is primarily to the Jewish people. That doesn't mean they never traveled. I mean, according to church tradition, Thomas ends up going to India, and there's a major city named for him today in his honor in India, and others went other places. But they were primarily ministering to the Jewish people. So what Peter's doing here, others may be doing elsewhere in Israel, but God is specifically directing Peter in accordance with what he's going to do about the Gentiles. So go to Lydda, and notice there are saints in Lydda, which means the gospel's already gotten there. Peter's not a pioneer bringing the gospel to Lydda for the first time. And there's a guy there named Aeneas, and he's been paralyzed for 8 years. He gets healed. Okay? And notice the wording here. Peter said, Aeneas, Jesus, the Messiah, heals you. That's just another reminder that Jesus is active. He's not just sitting at the right hand of God, letting the Spirit of God do everything. Excuse the expression, that may not sound, but basically that's it. Jesus is personally involved in what's going on. And here's a case of that right here. Remember the first healing back in chapter 3. Okay? This man is healed through the name of Jesus of Nazareth. Okay? All right. And of course, remember also that healing is a messianic sign. This is Israel. And Peter is just reminding these people that it's the one that they rejected as a nation, who claimed himself to be Messiah through signs just like this, that this is all happening. So all that dwelled at Lydda and Sharon saw him and turned to the Lord. Now, does all mean every single person? It could, but it's probably sufficient to say that there was a region-wide acceptance of this message. I mean, God just moved in that entire region. Lydda and Sharon is one of the most fertile and beautiful areas in all of Palestine. Luscious region. And there it is. So you see Jerusalem up here, about there. So he's made his way to Lydda. Now, if you keep your eyes open and keep moving, you see that eventually he's going to come to Joppa. And that's, of course, going to be very significant. So let's add Lydda right there, right almost in the middle. Lydda, Lydda. Messianic miracle, people come to Christ. And another thing I think we can say here is that God is not just setting Israel aside now. I'm done with you. I'm going to work among the Gentiles. I'm going to save Gentiles. No, he's going to do that. But he's going to continue to work among Jewish people, and Jewish people are going to come to Christ. Okay, so now he goes to Joppa, and there's a disciple. See, there's a group of believers there as well in Joppa. There's a disciple named Tabitha, and that would be her Aramaic name, and her Greek name would be Dorcas. Now, why does he use her Greek name? She may have been a Hellenist. I don't know for sure. And it may just be another way for Luke to keep the Gentiles in the mind of his readers, so preparing them for what's coming. But she dies, okay? And she's one of these people that you often, if you're a missionary and somebody, you have a ladies' missionary fellowship or something, and some people are just constantly doing kind things and sending you packages. She was that kind of a person, very, very much loved. Since Lydda was near Joppa, and the disciples had heard that Peter was there, they sent 2 men to him, imploring him not to delay in coming to them. We're not sure if they sent for Peter while she was still sick, or if after she actually died, they sent for Peter, wondering if he might have the ability to raise her from the dead. Okay, again, we just don't know. But somewhere in this narrative, they send for Peter to come without delaying. And so he does. And he brought him to the upper room. All the widows stood by him weeping, showing the tunics and the garments which Dorcas had made while she just had that gift of giving and making things, sharing with people. That was her love, her passion, and she was remembered for that and very much missed. So what happens? Peter sends them all out. Now, that's not rude, okay? Jesus did that also. Remember, he would send people out except for maybe Peter, James, and John, whom he often kept there with him specially. And he turns to the body and he says, Tabitha, arise. And she opened her eyes, and when she saw Peter, she sat up. Very, very similar to miracles that Jesus had performed when he was on the earth. Again, another very powerful messianic sign. So Peter's not showing what he can do, he's showing what Jesus can do. Gave her his hand, lifted her up, and when she had called the saints and widows, he presented her alive. So however many believers there were already in Joppa, we don't know. So now what happens here? As a result, it became known throughout Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. Joppa is a huge city. Lydda and Sharon are more rural areas, more agricultural towns, where Joppa was a larger city. In fact, it still exists today. I'll show you a picture in just a second. So it was that he stayed many days. How many days, Luke? Many days, thank you, with Simon a tanner. So I have 2 Simons staying together. Simon Simon Peter and Simon the tanner. Now, why does he mention he's a tanner? Yeah, it was an unclean profession. They had to deal with dead bodies. And so you would be rendered ceremonially unclean by doing the work of a tanner. And yet Peter stays in the house of this guy. So you just see how God, through Luke, is bringing us closer and closer. And think about this. The vision that Peter's about to have in chapter 10 is a vision that has everything to do with clean and unclean. So we're already getting a little hint of that here at this portion in the narrative. So let's add Joppa. So it's almost a straight line from Jerusalem to Lydda to Joppa. And you can see now Joppa is just down the coast from Caesarea, and that's where Peter's going to be heading. All right? Got it there, right? All right. So that would be that region today. Okay, Haifa, okay, Tel Aviv, it's kind of all in that same area. Beautiful area. If you go to Israel, you'll land there. Another shot somewhere on the coastline there. I don't know exactly where that is, but be in that same area. It's a beautiful place to visit. And you can see the contrast between the more traditional touristy view of this section and the downtown Tel Aviv area in the background there. So this is where this all takes place. All right, questions about 9 before we jump into 10. All right. Well, let's see if we can do some more damage here in chapter 10. Okay, a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius. Okay, Cornelius is very much an Italian name. He was a centurion of what was called the, I'm sorry, do we have a question? Oh, I'm sorry. That light in the back makes it hard to see. So, go ahead. Well, he hasn't gone there yet. Nope. He's in Joppa at the house of Simon the tanner. Now, there's a guy in Caesarea. Now, Luke is shifting gears now, and he's moving up the coast to Caesarea. And what's going to happen is there's going to be a connect between Caesarea and Joppa as the narrative wears on. Yeah, good question. Okay, so he's a centurion, which oversaw, normally 100 troops, although I think that was a little bit elastic. It wasn't always necessarily exactly 100 troops. He was of the Italian regiment, somewhere in Italy, maybe in Rome, who knows. Now, by the way, when all this is taking place, who do we know from an earlier account that's in Caesarea? Somebody's there. Philip. Remember, Philip, after his encounter with the eunuch, he stayed around that region for a while and worked his way up toward Caesarea. So he's not mentioned anywhere in this narrative, but he's probably around there somewhere. So who is this guy? Well, he's a regular Baptist Christian. Look at him. Devout man. He feared God with all of his house. He gave generously. I mean, Barnabas gave generously, right? He prayed. I mean, what more do you want out of a Christian than that? So what do you think? Is this guy a Christian? I read recently one missiologist that suggested that he was. The problem is I don't think he read chapter 11 very carefully. If you look ahead in chapter 11, you'll see a place where when Peter recounts what happened in all this here, he says that the angel told Cornelius that he was to send for Peter, who would come and tell him how he and his household would be saved. Which being interpreted is, he's not saved here. Okay. Now, he's a God-fearer. Okay. Is he actually a proselyte to Judaism? That may be taking it farther than we're able to, but we do know that at least there's an interest in the things of Jehovah because he is practicing, or at least reflecting some of the practices. So how close he is to Judaism is hard to say, but these are the descriptors by which he was known among the people. I mean, if you're going to have a centurion over you, it's the kind of guy you want. Yeah, Delaney? Yeah, Philip, it's a good question. Philip, And we don't even know if Philip's in the state at this time. I mean, he did go to Caesarea, but does that mean he just planted himself there, or did he do itinerant work in the regions around? I don't know. But this is Philip the evangelist, not Philip the apostle, so he does not have apostolic authority. And we're about to see another body, the Gentiles, added to the church, okay? And if we understand the keys of the kingdom is somehow related to that, and God's use of the apostles to bring that to pass, then Philip won't do in this case. Yeah, and again, we're not even sure if he's in town when this happens. Good question. Okay, so this is the first of 4 mentions of households in the book of Acts who will actually come to Christ. And we know that Caesarea, Cornelius and his family will come to Christ, but later in chapter 16, Lydia and the Philippian jailer both and their households come to Christ, and Crispus. And so we Westerners tend to think of salvation conversions more as individual things, and they are individuals. Each person has to exercise faith in Christ. But group conversions, especially in highly collectivistic societies, where people think more in terms of the group, are not uncommon. Okay, and you probably have heard of tribal conversions, where an entire tribe comes to Christ. And household conversions reflects that same thing in the book of Acts. We'll talk more about those as we get to them. So there's Caesarea over there, and I'm not going to even stay here. It's just something I found from BibleHistory.com. You can look it up yourself. It just gives you some of the highlights of that region, how it was developed, and Pontius Pilate lived there. There were governors. Remember, these governors did not reside in Jerusalem. They resided in Caesarea. The Roman capital of Israel is not Jerusalem. That's the religious capital of the Jews. But the Roman capital of Israel is Caesarea. And so the governor had a palace there, a house of some sort in Caesarea. And he would go to Jerusalem just to kind of make sure things were under control during the big feasts and all that stuff. But there's a lot of good information you can read. I love the study of aqueducts. They didn't have fresh water in Caesarea, so where'd they get it from? They had to go all the way up to Mount Carmel, where Elijah met the prophets of Baal. And they had a huge, I can't remember how many miles that is, but it's a haul. And just think of the engineering to make the flow to be just right. If it's too much, the water overflows. If it's not enough, it stops. I mean, amazing feat, these aqueducts. To give you an idea how big they are, that's a little closer up. And huge. Slavery helped build these. Roman armies that were not deployed but needed to stay in shape also helped with these, and the building of roads and things like that, keep them buff. All right, yeah, here we go, right here. Let me back up. Yeah, Mount Carmel is about 24 miles north of Caesarea. There we go. So that's a long haul for the water. And then they have a continuing functioning amphitheater there. They still do concerts to this day. That little spot right here on the left, that's the ticket office, okay? And what's really cool is that, in addition to taking in a theater presentation, why not shop at the mall? And that's what this was. This whole area out here in front is what's the remains of the shopping mall, okay? And so, malls aren't a Western idea. They existed then. They knew how to get people in to shop and to see a movie all at the same time. This is taken with a fisheye image. It's kind of distorted, but gives you the idea of how close it was to the Mediterranean Sea. Right there was beautiful. I mean, when Herod did something, poor guy, I mean, he's such a wicked man, but such a brilliant mind. I can think of somebody else in the news right now. It's kind of like that, if you know what I mean. Okay. And there's actually a restaurant out there on what used to be part of the famous port that he built. Now, here's what's cool. If you guys are into construction, any of you, this port was built using submersible concrete. I didn't even know there was any such thing as submersible concrete until I read about this. And now they use concrete all different ways. CD, you know about that? Yeah. Amazing. And I'm telling you, the guy did it right. And but now there's a restaurant out there. What happened to that poor well, maybe didn't build it very well and it fell apart. No, that's not exactly what happened. What happened was when the Jews were rebelling against the Romans destroyed a whole bunch of things in Israel, including this beautiful port. And by the way, this port was reputed to be the second or third largest port in the entire empire. You had the Roman port, Alexandria was probably the second largest port, and then this one. I mean, that's nothing to spit at, you know, CD? You've done some study on this, haven't you? That's cool. That's neat. It's amazing. The engineering ability of these guys. What do you think of Noah? I mean, a few years before him. Built a boat, did a pretty good job of that too. I don't know if that boat would fit in this port or not. That's, I don't know, it'd be a squeeze. But anyway, yeah, thanks. Thanks for the additional insights. These are not facing the same direction because I couldn't find a picture that would, but at least you get an idea as to how it may have looked originally up top and what's left of it. I mean, even after the Romans came and destroyed this thing, they didn't destroy it because of Herod, because they would have respected Herod, but they destroyed it because of the Jews. That even though the Jews didn't build it, they were still proud of it. It was part of their land, and this was part of the humiliation of the Jewish people. So what happens? 9th hour of the day, this guy has a vision. What time is that? Yeah, 3 in the afternoon, right? Angel coming to him. Okay, we've seen angels before. An angel came to Philip, right? And an angel is appearing now to Cornelius. And he's afraid, which any of us would be. And he says, what is it, Lord? And he said, your prayers and alms have come up from a memorial before God. Interesting. Send men now to Joppa. Now, verse 4 has been interpreted by some people to suggest that because of his godliness, God came to him. That's probably a bit of an overstatement. He did show interest in the things of Jehovah. He's not a Christian, okay? I think it's probably better to say that God is at work in Cornelius' life in a general sense. He's been drawing interest toward himself even previous to this, and now he's bringing an angel. I mean, remember Jesus said, no one can come to me unless my Father draw him. Here's an example of a man who's being drawn by God to himself over time. And by the time he gets here, he says, God has heard your prayers and seen what you've done. He said, I've got more for you. I'm going to show you something that you haven't seen before. But I'm not going to tell you. The angel could have been much more articulate and exact in his explanation of the gospel. That's not God's plan. God's plan is to use redeemed sinners to reach other unredeemed sinners. And that's what happens here. You got to go get Peter. And Delaney, also thinking about Peter as being an apostle, right? Maybe using the keys of the kingdom. Angel didn't have that privilege. So go find Simon Peter. He's with another Simon the tanner. And don't make sure you don't get him mixed up. Bring the right Simon back with you. No, he didn't say that, but he'll tell you what you must do. See, he will tell you. The angel's not going to tell him. Interesting, isn't it? All right. So this guy has a lot of servants in his house. He's a pretty wealthy man. So he calls two of them and a devout soldier. He wasn't the only God-fearer in the house there. He had at least one devout soldier who was a God-fearer. And he sends these guys away. Tells them what happened, tells them what to do, and off they go to Joppa. So how far is it? Well, today, if you follow the main route between the two, it'll take about it's about a 12-hour walk. Now, I don't think they walked. I think they were on animals, okay? I don't think that these guys, I don't think he would have sent them, being the wealthy man that he was, he wouldn't have sent them walking. But even if he had, it would have only taken about 12 hours to get there. So, I don't know. So what happened? Now, remember how God worked on both ends with Philip and the eunuch back in chapter 8? Well, here it is again. He's working on Cornelius in Caesarea, and he's working on Peter down at the house of Simon the tanner. And he's hungry. And he goes up to pray. And it's about the 6th hour, which is noon. Yeah, you should be hungry. It's lunchtime. Now, there are lots and lots. If you go online, you can find hundreds of images of what first century homes may have looked like. I picked this one because it was pretty simple. I don't think Simon was a rich man. He was a tanner. That wouldn't have been, a source of wealth. But he was able to eke out a living doing that. So who knows exactly what it was like. But Paul, and the top was often used as places of meditation, or if you want to meet in private with somebody, you could take them up to the top there and meet up on the roof. So what happens? He gets hungry. You say, well, it goes without saying. It's noon. He wants to eat, but he falls into a trance. And liberal scholars will say, well, this trance is just because he's hungry. You start having hallucinations when you get hungry enough. Do you ever have that happen at a 12 o'clock class? The teacher's saying one thing, and you're starting to enter into a hallucination mode. And I had one prof taught Greek, and we met at 12 o'clock, and he said, let's open in prayer. And he said, dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this food. And then he caught himself, oops. No, this is class. We're still in class. But this is not a hallucination, ladies and gentlemen. This is a genuine message from God, okay? Heaven is open. Remember that? Heaven's opened. We've talked about that before. God is breaking through to man, and here's a case of that happening here. And down comes a sheet, and what's on it? Well, the question is, what's not on it? All kinds of four-footed animals. Were there hogs on this sheet? No? Yeah. I think there were hogs on it. I hope so. I like pork. But that would have been an offense to the Jews. Okay, birds of the air. And a voice comes and says, eat. Wow. So this is a buffet on a sheet. And God says to Peter, you can eat anything you want. Take your pick. And that, as you can imagine, was offensive to Peter. He's confused. Maybe he thought this voice was God's. Now he's thinking, maybe I'm hearing demonic voices. God would never say that. Do you ever wonder if something's going on in your heart, whether it's God trying to communicate with you or whether it's the devil trying to tempt you? You ever have that happen? I have. Shouldn't be that hard. They're so different. And yet sometimes we wrestle with that. Well, here's one artist's conception. And, who knows? You see the sea in the background because Joppa was right there on the sea, right? And they're up on the housetop. And this happens. So Peter says to the Lord who just commanded him, no way. Now, is he being disrespectful to God? Of course not. What he's doing is he's questioning God, wait a minute. You told us very clearly in the Old Testament we cannot do this. And now you're contradicting your own message by telling me to act in a completely opposite manner. Why? We'll have to wait until Wednesday to talk about it more. Thank you. Have a good weekend.